So of course Pesach, as we know, is coming up. So it's only fitting to focus on Yonei Pesach, Hilchos Chag. It's never too shameless to give a shout out to the Shiur from last year on Yonei Pesach. If you're interested in these inyanim, chametz, sugar, alcohol on Pesach, check those out. Now this year the kviyos is Gachaz, Gimel Chav Zayin, Mu'beres, right? So Rosh Hashanah is Yom Gimel, Tuesday, Cheshvan and Kislev are Kesidron, and Pesach is Zayin, falls out on Shabbos. So it also is fitting to talk about the halachas that are unique to this particular kviyos of Pesach. Now we're learning here in Kolel, we've been learning in the afternoon Siman Tov Mem and Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch Hilchos Pesach. So we're going to try to combine the two things. We're going to talk about the kviyos of Pesach this year in conjunction with Siman Tov Mem. We'll see if we can pull it off. Now, one of the aspects, one of the attributes of this kviyos is that in Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz we diverge, right? Because for us, Achin Shel Pesach falls out on Shabbos. In Eretz Yisrael there is no Achin Shel Pesach. So Shabbos is Isru Chag Pesach, and that's the reason why we have a fork in reading the Parsha, the weekly Parsha. The Kriya is different for a while. Last time it happened, everyone kept on asking over and over again, B'chlal, why don't we reunite sooner? Why don't we combine Parshias sooner so we can, but that's a different topic, not talking about that now. But one of the big chidushim of this kviyos is that the minhag that we're familiar with is that in this kviyos in Eretz Yisrael, Shabbos Isru Chag Pesach, Shabbos is conducted as if it were still Pesach, still the Pesach dik of food, everything is Pesach dik, and the chametz stays in the closet. And what's the general idea? The general idea is all our chametz that we have, we sold to the guy. In order to use it, we have to take it back. We have to buy it back. He has to sell it back. We can't do a kinyan on Shabbos. And that's a topic we've touched on here before. We spoke about that, particularly doing a kinyan, a pu'ula before Shabbos that then results in a kinyan on Shabbos. That was in the context of sales, internet sales. Right? And there's no, Pesach ends, Shabbos begins. There's nothing in between. So the chametz stays, that's generally how one would hear it explained. The chametz stays with the guy, so we don't have chametz in our house. We don't have chametz that we can eat. So, first time I heard this, whenever that was, it always seemed strange. It bothered me a bit. This taka, there's no. The rabbis can't figure out a way to figure out how we can get access to our chametz. Pesach is over. If it's the first time you're hearing this, I imagine you might find it surprising too. So, I happened to come across a Shakla V'Tarya, a discussion on this topic that touches very much on what we're learning in Siman Tov Mem as follows. And it doesn't look like we're going to be able to get to the bottom of every prat here in this shiur, and there's always what to expand upon, every prat that's going to come up along the way. But we'll jump in and we'll try to cover as much as we can. We might end up having to continue another time. So we're going to focus on something that was published in the Kovetz Kolel Torah that appeared in Yerushalayim. It was published by an individual named Shmuel Aaron Weber, who over time changed his name, Hebraicized his name from Weber to Shazuri. And he was an interesting individual character from Yerushalayim of old. He dressed that way. But on the other hand, he was the secretary of the Rabbanut and other moistus within that hierarchy. And he did change his name, so that tells you something. But this was at a time when there was still a lot of overlap between different communities that today are considered to be completely different things entirely. And on the other hand, on the third hand, he was a chashiv chassid and lelav, so an interesting person. So in the tzaddiks, he started publishing a journal called Kol Torah, with his name, Shmuel Aaron Weber, on top. And then it was interrupted in the turmoil in the Yerushalayim, Eretz Yisrael. And then, 10 years later, Tafshin Zayin, it started reappearing, and then a year or two into that, after Tafshin Ches, suddenly you see his name change from Weber to Shazuri. So we find, he calls it Shana Hey, parentheses Chav Beis, so Hey of the new cycle, Chav Beis from the previous, Chaveres Yud Yud Aleph, Simon Tammuz Tafshin Yud Aleph. We find an article by Rabbi Michal Tukachinsky. I think there might be different spellings and different pronunciations, but that's what I'm going with for now. So Rabbi Michal is one of the chashuv halachic figures in Eretz Yisrael at the time. He's very famous for his luach. He used to put out halachic luach for the year, every year, in which he went through a lot of the halachas, the day-to-day halachas that we need to know. Also Zmanim, he's very famous for being mevar and Yoni Zmanim. And happen to know that if you go to the Yeshiva Sha'olam, even here in the States, so till today, he's a brand name. Everyone knows the name of Rabbi Michal Tukachinsky. And on fast days, they like to joke about how, today I hold like Rav Tukachinsky's Zman, because for them, he's the earliest Zman for the fast to end. So that's where his name comes up sometimes. And one could perhaps say that there's a bit of a parallel there between him and Rav Chaim Noah, because Rav Chaim Noah also published a luach, was Eisek and Yonei Halacha. And we'll get back to that parallel a bit later as well. So in this Kol Torah, Siv and Thomas Tafshin Aleph, there's an article, among other things, there's an article about the Bracha and Yom Ha'atzmaut, very relevant topic at the time. But one of the articles is, V'dvar mechiras chametz v'Isru Chag Pesach shechol b'Shabbos. So he writes as follows: when the first day of Pesach falls out on Shabbos, so in my luach dinei minhagei Hashana, I write that Shabbos Isru Chag, it's usher to take the chametz that belongs to the guy who bought it, because Gezel Nachri is usher midaraisa. So he says, there is a Rav who published in a local paper that all those who sold the chametz through him, they can take the chametz even before it was repurchased from the guy, because he added an extra clause to his document that it's mutter for the meichrim, the yidden, to take from the chametz on the understanding that they'll pay, they'll meet up with the guy, they'll figure out who owes who what. So it's in the contract, so it's all good. And he added another point, that there's an Alter Rebbe that says that this doesn't count as Gezel Nachri. We'll explain what that is in a second. And number 3, that why is this even an issue limited to Isru Chag Pesach, Shechol B'Shabbos? Every Isru Chag Pesach, the guy who bought the chametz and now needs to sell it back doesn't always come to Yom Tov right away. Sometimes it takes a day or multiple days. And meanwhile, we can eat the chametz for these reasons, either because you put in a tanai, as he did, or even without a tanai, even if it's gezel. No. Now, when I was going through this, I wanted to know who the Rav that he's arguing with is. It's always more interesting when you have two sides, but it didn't sound so prominent. Rav wrote in a local paper. I didn't have the time to start guessing and looking and figuring out. But towards the end, I'll actually pretty much, I believe I figured out who it is. But as I went through this, I hadn't found that yet. So we're going to go through the Kol Torah without getting into who he's responding to just yet. Now, what's this word about the Alter Rebbe, which he'll respond to towards the end of his arichas here? Right, the idea that you don't even need it tonight, you can take it with the gezel. So for that, let's summarize, let's recap what we've learned in Siman Tov Mem, and then we'll know what the Alter Rebbe said, what the Alter Rebbe was referring to, right? So from Sif Ches and on, the Alter Rebbe says, Kaidim Shah Shishis, you can get Pikdoinus Min Anachri, Pikdoinus Chametz Min Anachri, even though it'll be in your house, so Pesach, Emekach Klum, just make a Mechitza Kil Chasa. Siftes, Bamed Var Mamurim, when you don't have a Achrayas, you're not responsible for Gneva Avei Deboinus. But if you do have that Achrayas, so then this Pikadon is considered La Yisrael, Inyan Bir Chametz, Kilu Hu Shalai Mamish, it's as if it's Shalai, because he's Chayav Achrayusa, so he has to do Bir Chametz, Min HaTorah, and if he doesn't, he's Erev B'Leisaseh. Sif Yud, But again, if he was not Mekabel Achrayas, etc., etc., it's not Shaloi. Sif Yud Aleph. That's all Gezakt Gevarin if he got the Pekadon Bestam without a particular place. So then the Yid can move it around as he sees fit, so it's Kamoi Chametz Shaloi Mamish, and therefore that together with Achrayas, it's Shaloi Mamish V'Ever Alav. But if there's a Zavas Miyuchadas, so that's the spot where it belongs, and he's not supposed to move it around, so then he doesn't have to do beer, even though he has Achrayas. There should be Mechitza Kil Chosei. So if you'd base, so if you'd gimel v'yesh cholke and I'll call zeh, right? I believe it's machlekes Rambam and Dovid, and they say that the achrayas al chametz is al Yisrael, even if he was only mekabel achrayas of gneva v'aveda of pshias, shalei shamar kedarach hashoimrim. So then, in all those cases, chametz zeh hu kishaloi mamish v'chayev levare ber of Pesach min HaTorah yidal tezvav sif tezayin ul inyan halacha. And all the points in which these two shittas differ, yesh la'achmer lechatchila kesvara achreina. Ideally, we should be machmer. What does that mean, yesh la'achmer lechatchila? Either to give it back, give the chametz back to the guy, oy sheyimkerenu lenachri acher, or he should sell it to another guy, get it off his hands. All this before Shah Shishas. But the Yavet of Shah Shishas came, then we'll be Saimach on the Svara Yishoina, so you're not Chayav Levadim in Oilam. You can keep it till the guy shows up. Once the guy shows up, give it to him right away, because you want to be Chayshish to the other Svara, so you want to get it off your hands as soon as possible. And after Pesach, we'll say that it's Mutter Afilu Ba'achila, Afilu Lo Yichzir L'Ba'al Ba'al Pesach. So what did the Alter Rebbe say there in Sifta Zayim? That L'Chatchila you should be Chayshish, and either return it, or Yimkadanu L'Nachri Acher. Wait a second, this is a pekadon. Someone gave you a pekadon to watch. You're chayshish to the shitta that says that it's a problem to keep in your house, so you go and you sell it to someone else. It's not yours to sell. Why are you selling something that's not yours? So there's a kunches achrin. Kunches achrin, sifkat in your alaf, the Alter Rebbe writes, oishim kerenu, kein mevur betaz. It's the taz and sifkat in alaf in a different context, derech agav, mentions the possibility of just selling it to a guy, a different guy. So we see this in the Kudah from the Taz, so the Alter Rebbe is taking that and applying it here. The Yachal Amaychrei Levaroi Av She'ena Shaloi. Now the Alter Rebbe comes along and explains what's Taka Pshat. Hatam Mishum Degzelas Hanachri Ein Ba Isser, stealing from a guy, robbing a guy is not prohibited. Elam Kein Eskaven Legozle Mamish Al Manash Shal Hachzir Dmei Agzela. If you literally, genuinely intended to rob him and you never intended to remunerate him, I believe the word is, to compensate him for what you stole. But if your intention is to compensate him, in that case you didn't rob him. You desired, you coveted, well in this case you're not keeping it, but leisachmid classically is you covet what someone else owns, and you take it away and you pay him, so you didn't rob him, but that's leisachmid. Like we say in Parakamad about Mitzia, Ayin Sham. And if it's not Leisigza, because you paid him, you compensated him, it's just Leisachmoid. By Leisachmoid, it says Reacha. So if it says Reacha, it's understood that it doesn't refer to a guy. How do we know this? Because the Kesef Mishnah says this for Oishek. So it's understood that the same applies here. So just like this, the Alter Rebbe was Mechadish, seemingly a Yisoid, and those who bring it inside it, from all Svarim attributed to the Alter Rebbe this idea. Right, so this Rav was saying that even without a Tanai, no, Pesach comes to the end, so it's not a case where you have to sell it to get rid of it, you sold it to the guy. Comes the end of Pesach, you can go and nosh on it, you can take what you need. You're stealing? No, you'll pay him for it. That's what this, he quotes this Rav as saying. He says, this is terrible. According
to this, you're not able to kill it. It's not your aver and you pay back and get out of it. So you're not able to kill it.
That's your intention, yeah. It seems like it's something you could do lechatchila.
Just for the government, you're planning on paying back.
I don't know. The Hasser Mechshoilim, I find it a necessity to prove to him, Shaga b'chol shleishos hadvarim. He got every point wrong. All 3 points are wrong, that he was machadish, quote unquote. And he must have written them in a hurry before thinking about them. But the main thing he wants to talk about, Tukachinsky, is the idea that you can add it to the contract. That, in particular, disturbs him. He says, if you add that to the contract, what you've essentially done is you've nullified the whole mechira instead. Why? So he starts off, he says, Maram Shik, Siman Neshei, Shuvah Siman Neshei, talks about Erev Pesach that falls out on Shabbos. That's the reverse type of kvias that we had last year. Pesach is on Sunday. But you have that interesting situation before Pesach. So the shaila was, right, we know that we essentially do the mechira and the sreifa at the same time in the morning. That's the minig. But then you have the rest of the day where technically you can have chametz after the zman and no one's stopping you. The question is, can you sell chametz? Can the chanbani keep the store open and continue selling chametz in the afternoon? So the Maram Shik said that selling it is beer. So of course you should sell it before Shah Chamishus like every other year, so there is no confusion from one year to the next. Once you sold it in the morning, because that's the minhag to make sure you took care of it at the right time. So once you sold it, it's not yours, so you can't have enough from it because you sold it. If you sell it and then say, oh, but I'm going to go use it, you're essentially being mevatel the mechira. You're saying this mechira is not valid, it's null and void, I'm doing whatever I want. Huh?
If you sell what, after Shah Hamishis?
Before Shah Chamishis, but then you keep your store open and you keep on selling from that chametz that you just sold to the guy throughout the day.
You sold the chametz and used the money to sell other things?
No. You have a store. You sold the chametz, the contents of your store, to the guy, kadas v'chadin. Then you keep your store open and you continue business as usual. You're selling chametz that doesn't belong to you, belongs to the guy. So he says, if you do that, so now what you have to do is, you have to leave a certain amount that your mashar that you're going to need for the afternoon, for Shabbos, that's not included in the mechira, and you eat that and you try to finish it off, and if you can't finish it, so back then people were more hamish with their Gayish neighbors, so give it to a guy, give whatever you have left over before the real Zman on Shabbos to a guy. That's what the Maram Shik says. So you see here, befedish, that if you take it, if you go and you start taking from the chametz after the mechira, you're mevatel the mechira. So kol shekain zot Tukachinsky, if you put that as a clause in the contract, so the contract is self-destruct. So even though there's a steichemed, chametz u'matzah, that says, there are some who disagree, he disagrees that you don't have to do the bechira, that Erev Shabbos, Shah Chamishus, you can do it at the end of the day, makes things simpler in terms of dealing with chametz like normal throughout the day. But they still agree that if you did sell b'Shah Chamishus, and you take from the chametz afterwards, right, you're being mevatel the mechira. No one argues about that, he says. He says it's also a tshuva from the Shaila Meshiv. The Shaila Meshiv, Madura Shtisa, Siman Gimel, he writes, although I tried looking it up and it wasn't there, didn't get down to the bottom of where it is. Someone is selling chametz dike mashke. So if he sells it to the guy on Erev Shabbos at the regular time, so bazoi, and then he wants to have a drink that Friday night, he's mevatel the mechira. Oh, we have a problem. I need to sell it during my day, but I want to have a nice drink Friday night. Obviously, the minig that we go with practically is to try to avoid any extra chametz. Just the challah, that's generally how it's observed or how we observed it. But he's talking about a metzias where you want to have a chametz trunk Friday night. It's mevatel the mechira. So he is coming up with this whole concept that no, maybe the mechira could go through on Shabbos. Right? We may have touched on it, on something to do with this as well when we spoke about this. Because there's not a problem. He argues, the Yid's not involved, the Yid did his part, whatever's happening at Shabbos is just mitzad the guy. And he doesn't know what the problem is. There's Rabbi Kiva Eger. Okay, that's that discussion. But he as well, the whole premise of his whole discussion is that he's agreeing that if you just sell it and you just take it, that's going to be a problem. That's mevatel the mechira. So we were trying to work around that. Maybe the mechira can be chal of Shabbos. That's where he's coming from. So again, kol shekain, if you include it in the contract. And then he brings a maisa from the Stei Chamet, Be'ir Achas. And the Stei Chamet actually writes, I looked it up, it's Be'ir Hazoist. Stay chametz says, a few years ago, whenever he printed this part of Mareches Chametz and Matzah, so 6 or 7 years ago, there was a maisa in our city that someone sold chametz to a guy on Chol HaMoed, meaning he sold his chametz to the guy Kadas V'Chadim before Pesach, and then a customer came along in the middle of Pesach and wanted to buy some chametz from him, like normal, and he made the sale. He's doing business with chametz that he sold before Pesach. He's doing business now in the middle of Pesach. Asarti kol chemtzai achar Pesach l'chol Yisrael. So what? You sold that one? All your chametz that you sold, and it sounds like it was commercial. He had the commercial amount of chametz. Everything that you supposedly sold to the guy before Pesach, it's Asr l'chol Yisrael. It was announced in all the shuls that Kol Chemta Shel Pleni is Asr l'kol Bar Yisrael because Shalach Yado, he started doing sales in the middle of Pesach. Batla Mechira Shel Afnei Pesach. So now it's Chametz Shel Yisrael Shel Avar Elav Pesach. And really it should be Asr Ba'ano, we should force him to throw it out. But it was worth many hundreds of ruble kasef. And I knew you wouldn't listen to that, so Mutav Livchar Harab Miyutai Tafasta Muat Tafasta. And there was a bit of a sniff because he had an excuse. He said, it wasn't me, it was my clerk, my Misharis. He's the one who did the sale on Mov Pesach. I didn't know about it, but I didn't believe him, and all his neighbors were beheading him and saying, yeah, we don't believe it. Of course he was behind it, of course he was involved. I gave him a knas, the Stechem, it says, he had to give pidyon nafsho, it stuck ala aniyim, whatever I told him to give. And then he said, Stechem, says, I was happy to see him, but I'm shik. Taka says this word, that if you play with the chametz, you touch the chametz after the mechira, batla kol mechira. Moving on with Rav Tukachinsky says, even more than this, we find the Rambam, the Torah, and Shulchan Aruch, and Siman Tov Memches, that there cannot be any t'nai in the mechiras chametz. The Taz explains, Lamashal, you can't put a t'nai in the shtar, right? You're selling it to the guy, you're a little nervous. Okay, I'm selling it to him, it's a bit open-ended. What if after Pesach he doesn't want to agree to sell it back? You know what, I'll put a t'nai in the shtar. I'm selling it to you now, but t'nai that after Pesach you sell it back to me. So the Taz, no, that's something you can't do, it's not a mechira. And it'll be chametz shel Yisrael she'over elav Pesach. The only thing you can do is that you can put a t'nai in that says that you could do whatever you want with it, but you can't sell it to a third party. Okay, so then at least you essentially prevented the guy from doing anything too crazy with it behind your back. That you could do. And the Karchaim says that he's not even sure about that. Because what if the guy will sell it? Then he'll be over on the t'nai. If he's over on the t'nai, batla mechira. You want to risk that? So Zakt Tukachinsky Haga Atzmecha. If you just put in a t'nai that he'll sell back to you after Pesach, it's mevatel mechir l'mafreya. Kal v'chaimer, he says, if you make a t'nai that you can take back. Is it a kal v'chaimer? He says it's a kal v'chaimer. Now this is something that he published in Sipur Behem Sheichim. He published it over the course of almost a year. A few oisius at a time. So that's the first part. Continued, Menachem Av El Lo Tovshin Yud Aleph, Chaveres Yud Beis Yud Gimel, Ois Dalet. He says, if you pay attention, you'll see in the Braisa and Psachim, the Rambam and Ter Shulchan Aruch talk at the beginning of Siman Tov Mem. Pekadon, a guy is pekadon by a yid. If he's Spachra Yusai, he's Chayav Levar. Quotes on Alter Rebbe, and it's Baker and Sif Yud Zayin, which is the last Sif that we didn't mention before. What does Alter Rebbe say? Kol makim shu chayav levaroi, af lefi svar harishayna, v'shachach einenas v'loi biaroi. According to both svaras, you were supposed to, and you didn't. There's no svara to rely on here. All along, though, it's not your chametz, it is the guy's chametz. It never stopped being the guy's chametz. Because we say you're over on that, so then you have all the consequences. It was the guys the whole time, and yet the Bal Yirah made it asr achilu ba'ana to every yid. As if it were the yids. Right, so he quotes from Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe says that it's asr ba'achilu ba'ana. And even according to the Magen Avraham, who says that in that scenario, what you could do though is just give it back to the guy afterwards. And Alter Rebbe also brings this din. We'll quote it from Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe continues and says, Mikol Makim, and ba bal anachri bal chametz little chamtzoi ben sheba b'toicha pesach ben sheba la'achra pesach rashay ha'yisrael litnei loy. You could at least give it back to him and say, here's your chametz. It's not like, wait a second, if it's aser b'hana and you owe the guy $100 for the value of this chametz, by giving this very chametz back to the guy, aren't you getting hana? Instead of paying $100, you're giving him the chametz. You're not being perei chayiv. There's no chiv here. The chametz is his. It was here all along. He put it. He deposited it. He can take it back. There's a problem that it's the chaser b'anol l'kol Yisrael. So what if the guy now is going to sell it to another yid? So in this case, that's not enough of a reason to force the yid to have to be mevaret and pay him back instead. If he wants to do a toiva hayashar, then to make sure that there's no michshel, then he should take the loss, be mevaret, and give it back. So that's what the Magen Avraham / the Alter Rebbe say. He says even the Magen Avraham who says this, and the Magen Avraham concludes that maybe you have this problem, right? That Seif Kol Seif, another yid might end up eating it. So he says, we have a kal v'chayr from here too.
The conclusion was that if you give it back to a guy, it might still be usher to another yid?
Yeah, so you have that problem, which the Alter Rebbe says, yeah, it's a problem, but it's still not forceful enough to force you to have to not give it back to him. So Tukachinsky, we have a kal v'chayr. Ma b'chametz. That belongs to a guy, and the yid only was makabel achrayas. And it's chametz shavar alva pesach, so kol shekain chametz, that was the yid's, and the guy who bought it from him, and that was the guy's left it in the yid's house. And the guy gave the yid reshus to take what he wants, but you put it in the contract. That's even worse than kabbalas achrayas. So it's chametz shavar alva pesach. This taka one day, the Chag Yaakov says that why should it be us if you're allowed to give it back to the goy be'en, then we should say it's mutter ba'ana. We should, even though you're even ba'al yirah ba'al yamatzah, but it's shlat lomer zagen, it's mutter ba'ana. It's first of all, most whole like the Magen Avraham the Chag Yaakov. But even he's only matter ba'ana, but not for other achilas. Here you want to eat it. You don't just want to have hana from it. So if the din of by achrayas is that if you have achrayas, that means that it's also ba'achila ba'ana. So he is saying, kal v'chaymer, if you put this in the contract. He says, but then he adds, b'frat, you have the reitze b'kiyumay problem. Should be just as bad as achrayas. How does any mechiras chametz work? Aren't you reitze b'kiyumay? So that's why he says, the place can say, you should sell the rooms. So there's no achrayas of the yid, because it's not in the yid's reshus, it's in the guy's reshus. But the Yavid were makel that if you didn't sell the room, or the chametz wasn't in the room that you sold, etc., we're still makel that the mechira worked. What's the difference between this and achrayas? Lamaisa, he says, okay, Muslim zog and by achrayas, there's a din of bivatechem, that when you take achrayas, so there's like a legal responsibility that gives you a certain bialos, a certain, at least bivatechem. But if it's just reitze b'kiyumay and the achrayas that we're referring to here is sort of incidental, then I guess Chazal didn't answer. But eichshehu, that would all be that's b'chlal by mechira. Trying to explain why mechiras chametz is allowed if you're reitze b'kiyumay. That's stam by stam mechira where the yid didn't touch it. But if the yid has reshus to touch it, then it's got to be the same as having essentially, if you have reshus the whole Pesach to go and take it, essentially. So that should be like having a achrayas. It should be like chametz shel alva pesach, and it could be he says it could be ma'ir here, but he's being mekat. And then he wants to add that he has more eichachas, that if the moicher leaves even any reshus, any schus to the yid, batla mechira. He says the yisoid of kinyanim is smichas daitoi, that the person who's buying it, who's on the receiving end of the kinyan, he's fully committed. He really believes in the kinyan. He's committed to the kinyan. If you don't have complete smichas das, you have a problem. Kiddushin, right? She has to be mechas daita b'ofen muchlat, like you see in halacha. So if you put a clause in the contract that says that the meicher can take some of the chametz, even if it's on the account, what kind of smichas das do you have? Does the kohen really feel like this was a proper sale? You're going to ask, in every mechiras chametz, don't we know that ultimately it's going to be reversed? So that's not a shaila. No, because we say that the sale itself is in ganzen be'emes and all the tenaya kinyanim, and it says in the contract that if the guy wants, he could actually take it and he could sell it and do what he wants with it. And if you don't do that, you have a problem. And if the guy goes ahead and does it, we really hope he doesn't. But in the unusual case where the guy after Pesach makes problems, we will be in trouble. That's what we'll do. Halacha l'maisa. We have to follow through with our commitment. It has to be real in that sense. And because it's real in that sense, so therefore the guy has smichas das. It's a full-fledged, genuine kinyan. And he says, Maisa haya be'erachas. Now I tried looking to see where else. I couldn't find. Either I missed something, or maybe it was a maisa they used to say about peh at that time. It says there was a wealthy paretz invited the guy who was the party to the sale, and he told him, I'll give you something better if you don't go after Pesach and sell it back to the Yid. Not clear what the paretz wanted. Was it just he thought he was having fun? He thought he was messing around? Matzah Yom Tif, the guy doesn't show up. They go look for him, they summon him. He tells them the Maisa, sorry, the paretz, I sold the rights to the paretz. So the Rav, what do you do in that case? There's nothing you could do. The Rav went and announced that all the chametz in the city, it's asur to take, and the Yidden have no bias over it. The next morning, everyone went and opened their stores, all the Balabatim went and opened their cellars, and they announced, it's not ours. Nothing no chametz in our possession, we assume mostly alcohol, is ours. The Ikarim Anachrim, the Goyish Poyerin, they came, they attacked the stores, they were robbing them, they were going to empty them out, hefker. Which again suggests that the paretz was just trying to mouse with them, because if he was kind of the rights, just seems like he thought he was going to make a joke, but Lamaisa, he didn't actually claim ownership over it, so it was, the Yidden are mafker it, so the Goyim were taking it. And then the Sar Ha'ir, the mayor, the governor, and the paretz, they realized that there's anarchy, something very terrible is transpiring. It wasn't in their interest for Sidrei Ha'olam to be overturned like that. When they finally dawned on the paretz that this is serious business, because he thought that the mechir is just a fiction, just a formality. So immediately, he says the Sar sent guards to stand guard to prevent the looting. And the paretz then had to get involved to try to return everything. Now it's his, so he had to return Yesera Plata to the owners, and he had to pay from his pocket to cover the damages. That's the Maisa that happened once. And he says that this story is told in so many versions, so it must have happened twice. Once in Poland and once in Hungary, because okay. No. But they all have very much a lot in common, he notes. Okay. Continue in the next. Tishrei Cheshvan Tavshin Yud Beis, part 3. He says also the Chumras, that the Paiskim are machmir, and the conditions of Mechiras Chametz show that there cannot be any space left over for the Bailam. It has to be complete all the way. Not just the Gra, who says you should not sell chametz just for Pesach. If you're selling the chametz, it should be a permanent sale. Also, the Eliyah Rabbah says in Prague they only were allowed to sell mashka that wasn't chametz gomer. They weren't allowed to sell chametz gomer. The Yeshua Yaakov brings the Bach that says that mechiras chametz is very questionable. It's b'kaishi hitiru, and he says takamini chareidim are machmir not to sell chametz gomer. Haduyim hazeh. That's true. But if you are selling chametz gomer, then it has to be a mechira chalut. We go over the top and trying to prove to ourselves, to everyone, this is a true mechira. So that's why originally you're supposed to take it out of your house and give it to the guy. And if it stays in your house, you should sell the rooms. That way it's not in your possession, it's in his possession, as we mentioned before. Many people rent, so they don't have the rights to sell rooms, so we can rent out rooms. That's the reason. If you look in the Alter Rebbe and say the Mechiras Chametz, the Alter Rebbe has a different thing to say about it. Ayin Sham. He says they also used to be machmir to give the keys. You're supposed to give the keys to the rooms, or at least have an art of Kabbalah. And he says the Alter, the Rabbeinu Balatanya in his Shulchan Aruch was machmir all these chumash. He was also machmir dafka to sell, to use cash. It shouldn't be on credit, so they shouldn't think it's just a formality. Just nowadays we're makel not to give the keys, and we don't pay. We just give a token, and the rest is zekefol v'milva. And Bechlal, we don't even sell directly to the guy anymore. It all goes through Beis Din. This is the topic that covered last year, the early history of Mechiras Chametz and how it turned from that into this. He says, Amal, you really were supposed to sell it yourself, and when they started selling it through a central party, the people were ma'ar, as we covered last year. But when there was no choice, it's the only way to make it work. There's just too many hidden, you can't make a million individual Mechiras Chametzes. So they added more, they strengthened the Mechira, that's why they added the art of Kabbalah. So we're trying to add as many chumras as possible. You want to come and start adding kulas and start putting in loopholes. You're going in the wrong direction here. Mentions also, Paiskim say you shouldn't sell the metal and the glass kalim. Just the chametz in the kalim. Because if you sell the kalim, we'll treat it like a real mechira. Now it's the guys. If it's the guys, no one needs tefillah. You want to have that headache? You don't want to have that headache. So don't sell those kalim. So we're treating the mechira as full-fledged mechira as possible. Finished that section. And now, two more. We'll have to be mekatzer a bit. Kislev Tevis, Tavshin Yud Beis, he continues. He says, I was very shocked to see that he said that it's not only the third point, it's not only to get to Isru Chag Shabbos, every Isru Chag, because the guy doesn't always come on time. And here he quotes more, he says, it's already 15 years that the old city, the guy lived in the old city, in the Arab quarter in the old city. The Yidden lived already in the new Shchunot. He didn't want to go out at night, it was dangerous, whatever it was. She says in the new Shchunot, they ate chametz in the meanwhile, and the stores opened, and they didn't have a tanai, didn't have his tanai, so there was gazal and achri, they didn't care. And Tukachinsky says, I'm shocked to hear about this. If you're going on business as usual without him selling it back to you, then why even bother selling it back? Skip selling it back. You seemingly don't care about that. So why are we even bothering to sell it back? It seems all the Paiskim seem to think it was very important to sell it back. You're telling me that days can go by without selling it back and everything's fine? He says, I and all the elders of Yerushalayim can say that as long as Rabbi Shmuel Salant, the Rav of Yerushalayim many years before, when he ran the Mechira, and I went to mention earlier, but Pashtos, I don't know when, it could be these questions, Bechlal, about Isru Chag Pesach in Eretz Yisrael. You have to keep in mind, these questions couldn't have arisen that long ago, because the whole Mechira, especially on this scale, could be fairly recent. So I don't know if we have any evidence of Mechiras before Shmuel Salant. Anyway, but Shmuel Salant, he says it never happened, not once, that the guy should be later, should delay even half an hour, even a quarter of an hour after Ma'ariv. He made sure the guy was standing there during Ma'ariv, and right after Havdalah, they sold it back. So everyone knew that after half an hour, it's taken care of. And now Reb Tzvi Pesach Frank, the Rav of Yerushalayim, who he says is the Mamal Makom of Shmuel Salant, and now he's been running it for 40 years, he has the same approach, and even when Yerushalayim was under siege, and I assume he's referring to 1947, 1948, when they ultimately drove the Jews out of that siege, and they drove the Jews out of the old city. But until then, he found a guy under the Hafkaza, under the bombing, he found a guy, and was to be immediately. Now, on this point, I can definitely tell you, look at Rabbi Brian's booklet, he always writes, you can have the chametz a minute after the Zman, you don't have to wait. And this is where something clicked, because I was searching a bit, I was looking a bit, and I found that Rav Chaim Noah has, Yaglo Teirat Tzemach Tzedek, they reprinted some of his Ha'aris Lamaisa, which now there's a sefer, they printed of his Ha'aris Lamaisa. So there they mentioned that he said that you're allowed to have the chametz right after Havdalah. And then he adds that Oidin Hagti Lohaisef Bashtar Mechira, Shem echad me'amar shem limkar chametz le'yirtz litin chametz shloi le'yibatel hamacher. No, that's earlier. I added Gumnas and Shus le'ishtamish im kol chametz anal tekevach hashvi shel Pesach v'yishalmu le'v or chametzamishumish mechid hashava al pi hashuma nizkares. Now when I saw this, a light bulb went off. I thought to myself, wait a second. Tukachinsky is saying that he's responding to a Rav who wrote in the papers. These are ha'aris l'maisa from Chaim Noah that he used to print in Hamodia, whatever the paper was. Could it be that Rav Tukachinsky Taka has been arguing and responding to Rav Chaim Noah all along? So I don't have the Sefer Ha'aris l'maisa in my house yet. I'll probably have to go get it now. But I reached out to someone who does, and sure enough, even though here they only mentioned this prat about a regular Isru Chag, but Taka in Ha'aris l'maisa, you see the whole correspondence that preceded this. First, Rav Chaim Noah printed that it's fine for Shabbos. And then Rav Tukachinsky responded with a question. And then Rav Chaim Noah responded and he mentioned the Alter Rebbe about Gezel. And then apparently, and I don't think they knew about this, apparently then Rav Tukachinsky Mamish genommen to Rav Chaim Noah's Beiner here about Yichus. So we're going to have to pause here. I think we're going to have to continue in a part 2 where we can get a bit more into what Rav Chaim Noah said, what others have said, what the shittas are, what the halacha l'maisa l'maskana is, legabe this kvias with Isru Chag Pesach in Eretz Yisrael on Shabbos.
It's a big minute for if you sell for thing, if they're going to be eating the